In today's video, we have a lot of news from around the league and some trade talk as well, including a potential deal between the Leafs and the Ducks that's reportedly being discussed, looking at a potential for a 4 or 5 player deal. This is not a deal that involves William Nylander, but of course, there is some talk about Nylander in today's video as well. Did the comments from Brad Treliving on the Auston Matthews contract actually kind of take a jab at Nylander? We'll discuss what some people think about that. We have news out of Ottawa as well, plus another situation in the SHL that's a little bit interesting and odd, and we have some updates as well regarding the NHL and their deal with ESPN. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to take a look at today. First up, we have some kind of, I guess I'll describe it as being a little bit of an odd situation from the SHL, but it involves a former NHL player, so I wanted to kind of discuss it here today. Former NHLer Kenny D'Agostino, who last appeared with the Maple Leafs, mostly played in the American Hockey League for them, played a little bit, very little in the NHL. I believe he was originally drafted by the Devils and had some other teams that he was affiliated with before leaving the NHL. Played in the KHL last year. Now, there were some players that, depending on people's opinions out there, I know because of the conflict in Russia, there was anybody who was kind of going from North America to play in Russia. Some people were not too fond of the idea and thought it's something that they shouldn't be doing, to go and play in Russia amidst all of the conflict that was going on between them and the Ukraine. Now, of course, like I said, I'm not really sure, obviously, what everybody thinks on that, and that's not really the point of the conversation today. But in D'Agostino's case, he played in the KHL and had an opportunity, I guess, to move over to the SHL, but chose to play things out in the KHL and fulfill his contract, mainly because it looked like it was, more of a financial win for him. It was going to make more money. So D'Agostino then just recently signed a contract a few days ago in the SHL, and now they've decided that they've terminated the contract and they no longer want him to play for the team. And apparently this kind of sounds to me like they've based on their comments, it makes it sound like they kind of learned new information, or maybe they're feeling some pressure from local people. I'm not sure, but basically because they're saying that because of his desire to stay in the KHL and not come to Sweden sooner, the fact that he played there last year, even though all the conflicts that were going on, they no longer want him on their team and terminated the contract. What I don't understand is they would have known this before. So if they didn't want to sign him, and if they want to take issue with players that played in Russia, I guess that's their own prerogative. If they can sign whoever they want. And if that's a moral deal breaker for them, then why'd you sign them in the first place? I don't understand why they signed him and then let him go. To me, it kind of sounds like it's more of a pressure situation from other places, and it just totally, I don't know. I'm not sure if Kenny D'Agostino is going to play elsewhere in Europe or what's going to happen, if he's going to try to make an NHL return. He said even the last time he was in the NHL, he barely got a sniff, so I'm not sure if that's really in his best interest or not, but just a really odd scenario in Sweden. And I wonder if other players who chose to play in Russia when they might have had opportunities elsewhere, because they had an opportunity to make more money, if other leagues are going to be kind of holding that against them or not. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say how that's all going to play out. So we'll see. But some weird news on D'Agostino's contract being terminated. Former defenseman in the NHL and Coyote Shark recently, I believe, had a brief opportunity with the Oilers. Jason Demers says in a recent interview that he's pretty much retired. He hasn't made it officially confirmed and official yet that he's done playing, but it sure sounds like it. And apparently he's been having conversations between NHL Network and the NBC Sharks affiliate about potential TV roles with one or both of them. So it sounds to me like Jason Demers' days of playing professional hockey are definitely over, but like I said, he hasn't filed the paperwork and made it official yet, but expect to possibly see him on TV as an analyst sometime in the upcoming NHL season. Speaking of NHL on TV, well, let's talk next about news I've seen. This came from Alan Walsh, of course, who's an NHL agent, one of the more prominent agents around the NHL. Very outspoken on Twitter, or I guess it's called X now. If you're interested in seeing more of an inside the business type of perspective. He also has a podcast through SDPN as well, called Agent Provocateur, and has had a lot of guests, and kind of you get to learn more of the inside part of the business, which I think is kind of neat just to hear a different perspective from an actual agent. Anyways, he put out some information on Twitter I thought was rather interesting, in indicating that the NHL, of course, as we know, is now entering its third season. During the 7-year contract, they come to the new U.S. TV deal with ESPN, and ESPN has had their subscription base fallen quite substantially since that deal began. Since when it first started, they were around 80 million people subscribing to that station, regular viewers, and now they're down to about 45. So that's a substantial drop. That's almost half. Certainly not the direction I'm sure that the NHL wants to see things going with ESPN. Now Disney, who owns ESPN, apparently is actively searching for what they're calling a strategic partner for the network. So that's rather concerning. You know, obviously we know that the U.S. TV deal was split up between ESPN and Turner. The Turner network seems to be doing phenomenal work. They've got a great crew, great bunch of analysts there that do a great job, very entertaining intermission segments and good commentating and everything really across the board. I prefer them over the ESPN coverage myself. But of course I live in Canada, so I mostly see, different broadcasts. But when I do catch an American feed, if I had to pick, I'd say the Turner network is definitely doing a better job of the two, but that's definitely concerning. You still got, number of seasons left here with this contract, and you want to see the numbers be increasing, not decreasing. But we'll see what Disney figures out for a new partner for ESPN, but I wonder if we'll see any impact on anything else, but hopefully things get turned around. News out of Ottawa as well. The Ottawa Senators have officially hired Shea Tierney, who's an analytics expert, most recently worked with Sports Logic. He will be there. Actually, this is kind of shocking in a sense, but we shouldn't be, knowing how the team was previously run under previous ownership, but he's going to be their first full-time person that's focused on analytics. Where a lot of other teams have departments of people, he's going to be their first full-time person, which is quite shocking. But of course, as we know, the sale of the Senators is pretty close now to closing. We know Michael Andlauer has been approved by the NHL's executive committee. They just need to do the conference call vote with the full board of governors, which is likely going to happen sometime this week. So it's pretty darn close to being rubber stamped. So Andlauer, I'm sure behind the scenes, is already kind of doing a few things, and this is definitely has Andlauer effect written all over it. He would be familiar with Shea Tierney. Before Shea Tierney worked for Sports Logic, he worked with Andlauer and his junior team that he owns, the Hamilton Bulldogs. So obviously this is not a new relationship here. So clearly Michael Andlauer is bringing in people, as we said before, that he knows and trusts and that he's worked with before. That's why there's a lot of speculation about Steve Staios, and certainly bringing back some people that know the team and city very well, with the rumored returns of Cy Leader, the former president of business operations, as well as the best player in Sens history, Daniel Alfredson, supposed to be taking on some sort of a meaningful role. But to have Tierney on board as the full-time analytics person, they're getting caught up slowly here from behind, they're kind of behind the times a bit, but at least they'll finally have that, which will be a nice, move in the right direction. The Ottawa Senators front office has been one of the most thinly operated departments across the NHL, and the fact that they didn't have a full-time person on this, at least where other teams are running full departments, is quite mind-boggling. But like I said, the previous regime ran things very differently, and were known to be very much, I guess the word cheap comes to mind, as far as not spending money on things like that. So we'll see how much of an impact, positively, hopefully, this all has on the team moving forward. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about the Leafs here. We do have a Ducks and Leafs trade that I've seen in the rumor mill that I want to discuss. But before we get into that, because I said that trade does not involve William Nylander, even though we have talked about the possibility of Willie being a great fit for the Ducks before that. It was information that came from Mike Rupp of NHL Network that we discussed in the past week, where he said that if the Leafs get to the point they have to trade Nylander because they can't afford the extension, which many people feel is inevitable, but time will tell, that the Ducks are a terrific option, and he could go there and be a real leader and star player to really solidify their top six with all the younger guys they have coming up. But that was a conversation that we had a few days back or last week. This trade's going to be different. But the other thing I want to touch on first does involve Nylander. And we did talk about Brad Treliving. And originally when we talked about the Matthews contract extension, and after the following day, we kind of followed it up with a little bit more information, because Matthews himself and Treliving both did some media, answered some questions, made some comments. So we discussed that a little bit. And I guess at first glance, I didn't make a lot of it on what he said. But now some people are kind of, wondering if maybe we, I guess some of this could be interpreted differently. So what some are saying is essentially that the GM of the Leafs kind of took a verbal jab, if you will, at Nylander when he's talking about Matthews. So to show you what he said here, I'll bring up a little piece I put on the screen here at the quote, but it says, "This got done because Austin decided he wanted to get it done. Because Austin says, I want to get it done. I want it to be a non-issue. I want the focus to be where it needs to be, and that's on winning." Meanwhile, in the 32 Thoughts interview that William Nylander just completed with Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick a few days ago in Sweden, his big comment was, "I don't understand what the big deal is and what the rush is. I'm under contract for another year." So clearly, yes, you are under contract for another year, but the team who would like to have you a part of the future wants to negotiate and get your contract extension done so they can work on the surrounding, other players that need to be done here as well, to kind of project things out and start planning the future with this core, if you can, to see if they can make it work. Now, of course, the big question is, can they even afford what he is going to want? Because we already know that they had a lot of money tied up between what we call the big four: Matthews, Nylander, Marner, and Tavares. Well, Tavares still has a couple of years left. Marner's 1 year away from needing an extension. So this time next year, it could be Marner's turn. Austin just signed his contract extension, and now all the focus is on Nylander. Now, to be honest, I think in the beginning of the summer, there was a lot of word that, they wanted Nylander to go first. And that once then we kind of found out that there was no way Nylander was going to do that. Then it kind of became more clear that Matthews is probably going to get done late summer, late August, around there, early September is what the predictions were from NHL insiders. That's what happened. And now here we are. Now that he's done, all the attention, all the focus turns to Willie. And of course, he's sitting back, like I said, when he did that interview with Elliotte Friedman, it's like you can tell he doesn't care at all. Like, it's not that he doesn't care about winning or doesn't care about the team, but it's just like he's just so laid back, and he's like, yeah, I got a year left. Like, what's the rush? Ultimately he wants what he wants, and that's it. But based on comments from we've heard elsewhere, it just sounds like he wants his money that he is expecting, and if they come to him with the right contract, he'll probably change his tune. But ultimately, he's had a $4 million gap between him and Marner, and $4.5 million gap between him and Matthews, and there's just no way that he's going to accept a contract with the same sort of gap, right? So obviously, he doesn't have the sense of urgency. Treliving does. And people are saying now that not only did Brad Treliving go out of his way to kind of praise Matthews, but at the same time taking a jab at Nylander. And I can kind of see now, after looking at it a second time, that how that could be interpreted that way. I'm not going to say 100% that that's what he was doing, but it sure looks like it's possible. Now, of course, that doesn't mean anything's going to go sour here. Doesn't mean that Nylander's automatically going to be traded or anything of that nature, but it just goes to show that the two sides have a very different philosophy, have a very different way of thinking, and it does boil down to the fact that it doesn't bode well, I don't think, for getting a contract done anytime soon. And the longer this drags out, the better chance that Nylander won't be back. It's just that simple, but we'll see. Now, at the end of the day, there is another rumor about a Leafs and Ducks trade. This one kind of caught me by surprise. When I seen a rumor about a Leafs and Ducks trade, I just assumed it was about Nylander, which we had already discussed, and it's not the case. There's some speculation that they could be talking about a trade which would help the Leafs become cap compliant, because we know that there's a bunch of teams, the Leafs included, that need to find a way before opening night to shed a little bit of money. Now, there's different ways Toronto can go about this. They could reduce their roster. They might be able to move one player. Like, there's a number of different strategies. But this involves a 5-player trade, actually. It involves the Leafs sending like upwards of 3 players out and getting 2 players back. It could possibly be, I can see how the deal could be adjusted to a 2-for-2 trade. But at the end of the day, I'm not convinced that this is really something Toronto should do. They do need to do something to be cap compliant. I don't know that this makes them better. So the rumor, and let's just keep an open mind as I explain the trade, because I just don't see them doing this. But it's something that I wanted to discuss. So the deal that I've seen rumored here is that there has been talk about TJ Brodie maybe being a trade piece. I don't know that they should do that, but it was TJ Brodie, Timothy Liljegren, and Nick Robertson, 3 players going out. The total of their contracts will be $7.2 million. Now, I believe Robertson can still be sent to I don't think he needs waivers, so he could still technically go down to the minors. So theoretically, it'd be Liljegren and Brodie with the contracts for sure that need to count on the cap. So instead of 7.2, it could be like 6.4. And coming back would be, the main player coming back would be Frankie Vatrano, who's making 3.65 for, I think, 2 more years, and another younger defenseman who also could go to the minors, like an Urho Vakanainen. So essentially, like the Leafs, I just don't see how does their decor gets way worse. Like I said before, I understand the concept by a lot of fans to maybe move Brodie because of the cap hit, and I know a lot of fans were unhappy with his playoff performance, but how is your decor any better? Like, Vakanainen may not even be an NHL defenseman. He's a fringe player, in my opinion. You're taking away Liljegren and Brodie, and you're not really replacing them with anybody who's a surefire top 4. Like, why would you do that? Now, yes, the cap. But the reason to do that shouldn't just be, well, the cap. We have to do something. There's other ways you can go about this. I don't mind Frankie Vatrano coming back. I think he could be a good middle 6 player for the Leafs. Again, to add to the forward group by subtracting multiple D doesn't make sense. Now, let's say they alter the deal and it was more Brodie and Robertson, take Liljegren out altogether, and he makes 1.4, so you leave him back in the conversation here. Because the other way, like I said, you're taking away $7.2 million, but Robertson's contract doesn't have to count. It could be buried, so therefore you're taking away at least 6.4. Coming back, Vakanainen could go to the minors. Vatrano makes 3.65. So you're saving not quite $3 million. You're saving more than enough to be cap compliant, because they need to shave off, I think it's like 2.8 or 2.9 million. So ultimately, cap-wise, yeah, it works, but I think you're worst team, so I don't know why you do that. Secondly, if you take Liljegren out of the picture and leave him with the Leafs, and you trade it Brodie, because obviously Brodie's contract is kind of being viewed upon here as being less favorable. You're going to add something to it. So Brodie and Robertson, who could get a fresh start in California, which is ultimately where his family's from, so I'm sure he'd be open to that. And then at the same time, taking back, Vatrano, and maybe a guy like Vakanainen, 2 for 2, you still save some money. At the end of the day here, you save over $2 million. Now, it doesn't solve everything, but it gets you closer, and you're not as bad off defensively. But like I said before, and I've said it a few times, every time Brodie's name has come up on the rumor mill, if you're going to trade Brodie, you better be prepared to find somebody to come back that's going to be better than him. Or what's the point? He's got 1 year left of $5 million. He has some trade protection as well, so he may not even agree to the deal. And to me, he's a player that Brad Treliving knows well from his time at the Flames, where he played before he came to Toronto anyway. I don't know. As much as Brodie might not have had a great playoff, overall, his time as a Leaf has been pretty good. And he's been a solid top 4 defenseman that's very serviceable. So I don't understand the desire to move him unless you have a real shot at getting a stud top 4 who's younger, can be with the team longer, making better, contract for the short term. Like, there's lots of little things that I would have on a checklist that I would only consider moving him for, and those are not being met by this trade. So to me, as much as they may be high on Vetrano, I don't know that you really need them. I mean, look at all the players you added. You already added Max Domi. You added Todd Bertuzzi. You get Matthew Nyes, who's trying to have his first full season and grab a top 9 role. You know, you got Matthews, you got Nylander, you get Marner, you get Tavares. Like, I don't, you know, you also have Calle Järnkrok. Do you need another top 9 player and to subtract a couple of defense? I just don't think so. To me, you're making yourself worse. And if you're going to include anybody else, if you want to bring in Vetrano, you need to move another forward. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. I can see that, like I said, the possibility of Brody being. I understand the rumor mill, why it keeps bringing him to the table here, but if they're really considering trading TJ Brody, I really suggest they proceed with caution, because I just don't know that they're going to bring back a player who's stronger than him. And that, to me, is the area they need to focus on. If they're going to win the Stanley Cup or have a deep playoff run more than one round, to me, the question marks right now are between the pipes and the D. They have all kinds of offense. You know, the defense was pretty good last year. Obviously, it's changed a bit. I don't know that it's better. You know, will Samsonov hold up? That's a big question. Murray's likely going to be on LTIR. How much of a role is Joseph Woll going to have this year? Is he ready for it? Like, not saying that the goaltending is going to be an issue. I think they have the potential to be really good. But if I was going to probably predict down the line what the Leafs will do closer to the deadline, I would say they're probably going to bulk up on defense. That would make the most sense. So, anyways, I don't think it's a deal that they should do, but that's what's being speculated right now. So we'll see if anything comes from this or not. I would suspect Brad Treliving hopefully will come to his senses and not pull the trigger on this kind of trade. Let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.